Welcome back, everyone. We're live. Onan here. I'm going to just quickly post the link to this, I think, in my Discord, and then I'll get started here. So bear with me. I know that some people have said that they don't get notifications necessarily when I go live. So for those of you who sit around just waiting for old Onan to go spout off some nonsense, I'll try to give you some a little more of a heads up. So, um, last day my wife's um, on jury duty today, so I'm at home waiting for the youngest to wake up and the sitter to arrive. Actually, before I get into today's topic, I wanted to put a little pitch out for jury duty. Never been on jury duty. I know a lot of people dread the idea, but it's a really, really important civic, I would say, not only responsibility but opportunity to um, really uphold the rule of law in your area. I've been on a jury before. This is my wife's first time being on a jury, and it's really important that good people be on juries. So just wanted to put a little pitch out there. I'm sure there's some Catholic rule somewhere that also says you should handle your civic duties. So consider this, Onan, reminding you of that. I've got about 20 minutes here, and then I have to make a phone call. But I wanted to talk about just this is just my experience, but my experience of being married 20 some years, using NFP for most of that, at different times, less, I guess, less aggressively than others. Um, and I've really identified, I think, three distinct categories or phases, if you will, that for me personally, and this is not necessarily reflective of what everyone goes through and probably doesn't reflect how most wives experience marriage, but I think you will find that if you're a Catholic married man, you can probably relate to some of what I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. And just to add to the intrigue just a little bit, I'm not going to tell you which phases came first, which I'm consider uh, currently identify with, but you could probably do the math. But I'm just going to these are in no particular order. Okay, let's just say that. So, and just by way of background, because I'm going to talk about some um, things that might be uncomfortable for most people. As you know, on this channel, I try to be pretty open and transparent about the realities of married life from perspective of man. Yesterday I was talking about porn, but usually I talk either directly or indirectly about um, solo acts, other acts, things like that. Um, it just for transparency's sake, let me just say this: solo is not something I somehow. I'm not saying it was because I was particularly virtuous or anything like that, but it's not something I really it didn't I never had any experience with that until I was in my 20s and in dating my wife before we got married. But we were, I don't know, we were probably engaged at that point in time. So just so by way of background, that was my first experience with it. And it was something that I thought, well, once I'm married, we don't have to be virgin slash celibate anymore. That will be something I don't have to think about anymore. Well, if you've been following my content at all, that's that hasn't really been the case, and I don't think it's the case for most men. So, just by way of background, that was sort of kind of how our marriage started. We had we were virgins. We got married. I had really no other than when I was very young, really had no exposure to porn or anything like that. I mean, I for the most part did things the way you're supposed to do it. But once I got once I got married, I realized that, well, the reality is very different than what I thought it was going to be. So we had learned natural family planning before we got married. There was no question whatsoever that we were not going to use birth control, and that continues to be our position. We've never used birth control, have no plans to, and so anyway, that's well, we've been far from perfect. Birth control has never been part of our marriage, and as far as I'm concerned, never will be. That doesn't mean it's been smooth sailing from a moral perspective. And for me, I have always found it very, very difficult to navigate what I consider extended periods of abstinence without either viciously and white knuckling it to not, engage in solo, or just flat out just failing miserably in that respect. So that one phase of my marriage, I would describe as this. So we were either using NFP, or because we had a bunch of kids, abstinence was just a normal part of our relationship, right? And so under those circumstances, intimacy never happened more than once a week. Let's say once every couple of weeks, or if we were actively using NFP, you know, abstinence was, a couple of weeks at a time. And for me personally, biologically, there's something happens at about day 5. Joan and I have talked about PMAS a lot, post-marital act syndrome. You can call it what you want. It's a real phenomenon. It's something that just kind of builds up over time and starts to interfere with a lot of things, including sleep, attitude, focus. And the trouble I've always had with abstinence wasn't the lack of sex. That's actually not all that difficult. It's the buildup, the biological buildup that occurs. And with that being, solo really being the only way to um, relieve that pressure, other than just, like I said, grinning and bearing it, which I'll be perfectly honest, I've never been very successful at. So during this period, I was sort of horrified at what was going on, and how it just seemed like it was nearly impossible to be the perfect Catholic man that I wanted to be, and I thought I had to be. Um, Frequent trips to confessional, frequent periods of time where I wasn't going to communion, um, kind of bitterness that ranged from myself to the church to God to my wife. Um, and for during this phase, I will be perfectly honest, seeking sexual intimacy with my wife was primarily my way of trying to stop the solo. It was my hedge against solo, because everything restarts. You are all the pressure goes away, everything is sort of reset, and you have time where you're not bothered by it. And so because of that, when it'd been a while, let's say it's our night, and something would happen and it doesn't happen, it would inevitably result in solo afterwards, just because once you start priming the pumps, it gets especially uncomfortable, and I got irritable and sort of downtrodden. My wife rightly would acknowledge or complain that I was mopey. It wasn't so much that I was mopey that we weren't able to be intimate, but because, again, here I was a bad Catholic boy again. And that was a real disheartening, depressing phase. Um, we we um, we really did not thrive under those circumstances. And again, I was in this constant battle of trying to pursue intimacy, to try to overcome this sin that I thought I was just um, a better intimate life away from solving. Um, and and so that was my experience. I'm not saying, I'm not here to justify any of that. I'm just telling you how it was, or how it is when I'm in that phase, and it really messes with uh, your entire life, and you spend a lot of your time thinking, well, I'm in a state of sin. If I get hit by a bus before I go to confession, I'm going to go to hell. And you start to hate everything about your life, because it seems like you're trying to do the right things, trying to be open to life, having a large family, not using birth control just sets the stage for you to be in a miserable moral state. So that is more or less how I would characterize this first phase when it has been present in our marriage. And so let me tell you about a second phase, and this was unfortunately a pretty brief phase. It is about we had a period of about 4 or 5 months when, after some really important and long overdue conversations with my spouse, we um, we made it a point. So we had extended infertility because my wife, thank goodness, when she is postpartum and is exclusively breastfeeding, cycles don't come back for generally at least a year or so. So we were sort of enjoying the extended infertility that goes with that, and we made it a point to be intimate every 4 days. Every 4 days, pretty much without exception, we were able to do that, and I would say it was one of the best times in our marriage. We really thrived. I had absolutely no issues whatsoever with the solo stuff. Wasn't even a temptation, much less something I had to fight. Didn't really have to go to. I mean, it was it was sort of heavenly. It was sort of heavenly for while it lasted, and of course, it can't last if you're like most of us, because eventually you have to start using NFP again, and I have yet to see a method of NFP that has a abstinence window of less than 10 days or something like that. Yeah, I think it's a common phase for a lot of us. I think it's just the reality. I think most guys, if you're a reasonably fertile couple and you're having children, you're going to be in that phase at some point, and maybe for a lot of your marriage. So the second phase was the only time in our marriage where I felt more or less free, um, of these issues, these burdens, and I was really able to focus on other parts of my life and my faith, because like it or not, the frequency of intimacy matters greatly when it comes to this issue. So that's phase two. So let me talk to you about the third phase, and not every point in our marriage falls nicely into one of these three categories. But I would say, for the most part, this is a fair description of these distinct phases of my marriage. So let me talk about a third phase that I've been in at some point in my marriage. It was more or less phase one. Um, the only difference being is that instead of being constantly bent out of shape, trying to avoid the solo, or trying to stop it, or trying to, you know, get to confession or whatever, um, I decided I'm not going to worry about it that much. If it happens, it happens. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to try and make the best of it, and I'm going to treat it more of a biological process, similar to uh, feeding yourself when you're hungry, getting a glass of water when you're thirsty, going to the bathroom when that urge occurs. And so in that phase, when I've been in that phase, it hasn't when I've been in that phase, it's not like it's without any, I mean, it's still difficult. Like, so just so we're clear, being unable to engage in the full conjugal act with your spouse is a sacrifice. Um, Anything you do to substitute for that, whether it's by yourself or with your spouse, is going to be less fulfilling, less desirable, less enjoyable. At least that's been my experience. I suspect for most people it's the same thing. So even in this phase, when I was in this phase, it's still a sacrifice. Like it is difficult to go, for us when we've been in this phase under our method of NFP, it's generally meant an average of about 2 weeks of abstinence straight, plus you have the menstruation that's kind of not available. So you have more than half of your cycle is quote unquote unavailable for sexual intimacy. And it is a sacrifice when you're in that phase. It is not easy, but what I can say about that phase is it's manageable. Um, no longer does it become imperative that intimacy happen when it's available to you. You don't force intimacy because, oh my gosh, it's been a long time, and if it doesn't happen today, I'm gonna break, and I'm gonna have to make a trip to the confessional. That is the primary difference in that phase. Let's say phase three from phase one is you're not constantly dealing with this uh, overwhelming moral crisis, for better or for worse. And again, I'm not here to say that that phase is the right phase. I know that people will say that's just sin, um, jading your conscience and all that, and it may very well be. I'll fully acknowledge that. But what I will say is, when I have been in that phase, my marriage has been so much better. My relationship with my wife has been so much better. I have been able to pursue my wife, um, for different reasons, because we want to be intimate, not because I need her to keep me from falling into sin. And then when you make plans and things don't happen, it's not it's still disappointing. There is a disappointment, but it's not like, now I'm despondent and mopey. Like, that's the big difference. Um, and so it's one of those things where, in that phase, when I've been in that phase, I still don't look forward to the abstinence periods, but I don't dread them. Like, I just don't approach them with overwhelming dread the way that I do when I'm in phase one. And I'll go so far. I'll go so far as to say I honestly don't know that it's possible for most people to thrive under phase one. And maybe I'm sure there's people out there that can say they can. I think for most guys, especially, phase one is just a hot mess all the time. And I think really, really puts a strain on your marriage, puts a strain on your relationship with God and your faith. And if if we do nothing, what if we do nothing but just acknowledge this, then I think that is a step forward. But I'm just I know that there are people out there that can relate to these phases, but for understandable reasons would never ever talk about them publicly, outside the confessional. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Those are the three phases that I've identified in my Catholic marriage. I'm still a work in progress. I'm constantly searching for better answers and um, better prayer, better discipline. And so I'm just being transparent with you guys, because I think it's something that needs to be kind of said out loud instead of just in quiet. Um, so anyway, Jonah, what makes an ice auger with sharp blades slow to go through the ice? I don't know, friction. I don't know. I don't know what this has to do with it. But I just think, and I get like people. I think the final point I want to make here is this: the common response to any of this is always, well, marriage is not supposed to be easy. The Christian life is meant to be the cross, and suffering is part of it. And I get that. Like, I'm not here to dispute any of that, but I think there's a difference between a difficult, like I said, even under phase 3, marriage is difficult. It is a sacrifice. You have all the domestic responsibilities. You're giving up something that if you had your choice, you would absolutely participate in. And so you are, you know, just just so we're clear, it's not like it's a cakewalk. It's not. But the difference in the difference in the impact on the marriage between phase 1 and phase 3, I think, are just so dramatic. Like, just it's not just a slight difference. It's a really dramatic difference that I think needs to be at least acknowledged as we're talking about these things in Catholic spaces. And it's really, really hard to talk about this because, I mean, the rules are what the rules are, and they talk about things as being intrinsically disordered, intrinsically evil. You can never do it ever, regardless of the circumstances. And so it makes it nearly impossible to have these kinds of discussions, at least out in the open. And so I'm trying to change that a little bit. Obviously, you don't. I do this somewhat anonymously, try to anyway, but I think it's something that must be said and talked about. And all I could say is when my wife, and just so you understand, when I've been in phase 1, I've kept that hidden from my wife, the struggles. One of the major differences in our marriage was when I after many, many years, told my wife what phase 1 was like. Otherwise, she really had no idea because her experience is totally different than mine. Um, quite frankly, she's more than happy with NFP. She doesn't struggle with really any of this stuff. And so, but for her to be aware of that made a huge, huge difference in our marriage. And in fact, it was sort of what gave rise to that brief phase 2. So I really want to encourage couples, especially any women that hear this. If this is news to you in any way, I really want you to maybe consider approaching your husband about it and asking him and sharing this video and see if he resonates with all this. And you're gonna need to make it clear to him that it's so it's fine for him to resonate with this, and you're not going to judge him or whatever, get angry at him if he says, oh yeah, that Onan makes a lot of sense, I've been through that. um, Make it clear to him that whatever his answer is fine, but you want to know what he has to say. And I think you'll be surprised at how many men can really relate to this. um, and from what I can tell, it's not a problem that ever goes away. At least it gets a little easier with age, but not a ton easier from what I can tell so far. So, okay, well, I appreciate you guys who showed up. Thanks, Jonah, for showing up in the chat. Appreciate everyone who's listening. There'll be more of this. Please leave your comments or send me a message if you have any particular questions or want to share something. I always keep those things confidential, and I do love hearing from people, especially if these videos resonate with you at all. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Appreciate everyone for listening. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.